Hi guys, welcome back to my countdown of my top 20 favorite films of all times list. Let's not waste any time, let's get right into number 8. Number 8. Marvel's The Avengers. I know, especially after just talking about it. I'm pretty sure you guys can tell that as I do these videos, I talk about these films off the cuff. None of this is really scripted. I don't really plan out exactly what I'm going to talk about in terms of the film, and I just basically start filming myself talking about them. And I knew I wanted to include The Avengers on this list because it is one of the single most fun times I've had at the movies in a long time. Especially considering what genre of film I'm watching. You know, I expect to either be scared or exhilarated or sad or dripping with romance. You know, I expect to go to the film to be sort of filled with the emotion that that genre calls for. And for the most part, while I am moved by films, a lot of the times they just don't move me in the right direction that I sort of feel like I should be going for. And I saw Marvel's The Avengers 3 times in theaters. And I can, obviously a lot of people will be like, well, because you're a Marvel person, you love Marvel comics, of course you're going to see this movie 3 times. But let me make this very clear. I did not like X-Men Origins Wolverine at all. I liked X-Men First Class, but I didn't like it as much as Marvel's The Avengers. I love the Iron Man movies. I liked Captain America. I liked Thor. I even really like The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is one of my favorite comic book films, at least within the last decade. It's not hard for me to come out here and say, yes, I like a lot of comic book films, and that, you know, it's easy for me to like a certain type because I am particularly driven by one company in particular. But at the same time, I cannot remember the last time I hooted and hollered and laughed and cheered as much as I did the first time watching The Avengers. And even the second and third time I saw the movie, I was still cheering and giddy as a schoolgirl, you know, every time I watched it afterwards. This is the reason why I include something like The Avengers on my all-time favorites list, is because of the exhilaration it gives me, because I've been a fan of these comics for so long. And to see the characters and the situation fully realized to their full potential, which I do think The Avengers was. I think The Avengers was the comic book film that all comic book nerds wanted to see. It wasn't necessarily pandering, but it gave us what we wanted in our comic book films. There was something from the X-Men trilogy that I've always felt was kind of lacking, especially because X-Men is my chosen Marvel vice. But I understand that the X-Men universe is incredibly vast. You have a ton of characters, you have a huge universe you have to try and explain, and a million and one subplots and character sub-stories that you have to either push aside or you have to give full information on. The perfect example of this being is that Rogue is one of my favorite characters in fiction of all time. Rogue was by far my favorite in the X-Men movies, but at the same time, I don't feel like she was given the proper representation that we wanted from the character for the film. And I can say that for many other characters that were brought in from the X-Men universe. My other ones being Gambit, Storm, Beast, like these oh and God, don't even get me started on Angel. But like these characters were so underrepresented, and it's like, if you're going to include them in the movies, give them the proper representation that the fans expect from it. And I understand that's really hard to do when you're doing only a 2-hour-long movie, and you have to keep the plot revolving around the group of the X-Men, not just one X-Men in particular. But let's face it, almost every single X-Men movie has somehow revolved around Wolverine, and that's kind of why it bugs me that he's the one who got his own spin-off, and he's the one who is getting another movie about him. And that's not to say I don't like Wolverine. Trust me, I love Wolverine. Again, another favorite of mine. But he has pretty much been the central focus of the X-Men movies, and it's like, you know what, for once I'd like to see a Deadpool movie. I'd like to see a Gambit movie. I'd like to see a bit more backstory on Magneto. You know, I would like something to go a little bit more in depth than what they've just constantly been giving us over and over again with Wolverine. Now, what makes me excited for the new Wolverine movie is the fact that they are going more into the story about his time in Japan, which is an incredibly good story from the comics. And I'm really looking forward to that, and it sounds like they've got their shit really together for this one, and unlike, you know, the last absolute betrayal that the last Wolverine movie was. But getting back to what I was really talking about, which is that even as much as I love the X-Men comics and I liked the X-Men movies, except for the third one and Wolverine, there's something that was always missing from it that was not quite what we wanted from the comic books. There was always that something that where it's like, this is not quite what we expected. Versus what the Avengers did. Now, the Avengers was very smart about what they did, in that you do have a group of people who are superheroes in their own rights. They each have their own series in terms of the comics. Like, there's obviously Iron Man comics and Thor comics and Captain America comics. Each character has their own sub-story, and they each have their own superhero lives outside of the Avengers. And so it was incredibly smart for them to build a movie for each of the characters, except with the exception of Iron Man, who got 2 movies. But the point is that each of the characters was built up individually and treated as the main hero in their own films. You got to understand a huge part of what made them who they were, and then as a result, you didn't need to have a final film where one character's subplot was overshadowing all the other characters' subplots. You ended up with a film where every single character was utilized appropriately, and where they weren't being bogged down by their own personal bullshit. Whatever happens in the films, each character kind of has their point in the story. You know, each of these characters has their place in this film, and it feels cohesive. It felt like everyone had a reason to be there. And even, especially with how they play up Nick Fury. I mean, again, a character who has sort of permeated throughout all the movies leading up to the Avengers, and it manages to all to come back full circle, especially with the idea that they're using the technology of the Tesseract to make warheads, to make weapons of mass destruction. The way that they tie up a lot of the loose ends in all the films in this one film is what is so gratifying. The fact that you build it up in the previous installments in this franchise, and it has a payoff. And that's what we love about it. Not only do the fact that the comic book characters get properly represented in these films the way that they're represented in the comics, but like the comic book series, when you have something that appears in a previous installment, they pay it off later. There's a reason for it. They don't just arbitrarily throw something in just to be a callback for the fans and no one else gets it. There is every single thing that goes into these movies is great for the fans, but at the same time it's great for anyone who just watches the movies. You don't need to be a comic book nerd in order to enjoy these movies, and that's what I think is the great thing about the Avengers. It's accessibility to the mass audience, but at the same time giving the comic book fans who know these characters so well exactly what they want. That's why I love it so much. I know the way I've talked about this movie that it should be much higher on my list, but unfortunately I feel like over time, the Avengers will sort of lose its well, not lose, but it will die down a little bit. I mean, I'm still gung-ho for the Avengers, but there are 7 other movies on my list that I do consider more my favorites and that I will more regularly watch than the Avengers. So that's my number 8. Come back tomorrow for number 7, and keep watching to find out what my number 1 favorite film of all time is. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you later.